In the fading railroad town of Dry Creek, Nevada, a broke event producer was about to refuse the only buyout offer she'd ever receive. What started as clearing out a deceased uncle's bar took a shocking turn when she lifted a dust-covered bottle into the light and watched 3 regulars go silent with fear. Riley North wasn't your typical heir. For 29 years, she had spent her life building other people's dreams in Las Vegas event halls. Known for her stubborn refusal to cut corners, even when it cost her everything. When she discovered the wax-sealed bottle marked F&S 1917, gathering decades of dust behind a cracked mirror, she had no idea she was holding the key to a century-old water rights dispute. Riley's decision to learn the bottle's history rather than sell it to a predatory rival would lead to authentication procedures so precise that one wrong twist of the cork could void a town's future. What began as superstition about a cursed bottle would become proof of intentional preservation. The Creek Road community would never be the same after a lawful pour at high noon revealed a light-activated watermark that transformed fear into partnership, and a dying saloon into the Canary and Finch, where craft remembered became legacy rebuilt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The back bar hadn't been properly cleaned in at least a decade. I could tell because the dust filmed everything in the same uniform grey, like someone had taken a spray can of neglect and coated every bottle, mirror panel, and dead neon fixture with surgical precision. Uncle Ray had been many things: a good storyteller, a fair employer, a man who kept his bar clean and his head clear. But in his last years, the back bar had become a museum of things he couldn't bear to touch. I found the bottle on my first night alone in the Canary. 3 days after the funeral, and 2 days after the lawyer handed me keys I didn't ask for. It sat behind a cracked mirror panel beneath the neon canary that hadn't lit up since before I was born. Green glass, dark as creek water, sealed under a thick collar of amber wax that had melted and rehardened so many times it looked like geology. A tax stamp crossed the cork, brittle and brown but intact, and someone had scrawled on the label in faded ink, F&S 1917. The 3 regulars at the main bar went quiet when I lifted it into the light. Old Danny set his beer down carefully. Maria pressed her lips together. Even Hector, who I'd never seen stop talking, found somewhere else to look. "You're not thinking of opening that," Danny said. It wasn't a question. I turned the bottle slowly, studying the seams in the glass, the way the wax had been applied in careful layers. Something about it looked deliberate, not forgotten. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because every owner who's tried," Maria said, "lost something. Roy Patterson poured a glass in '89. Place burned down 6 months later. Before him, the Kellerman brothers opened one for their anniversary party. Health department shut them down the next week. I set the bottle on the bar between us, and the late afternoon light caught the glass just right, throwing a green shadow across the scarred wood." "That's superstition talking." "Maybe," Hector said quietly. "But it's consistent superstition." The door opened with its familiar groan, and Duke Salazar walked in like he owned the place. He probably thought he would eventually. Duke owned Salazar Station, the glossy roadside bar 3 miles north that served craft cocktails to lithium engineers and tourists who didn't know Dry Creek existed before their GPS sent them through. He wore pressed jeans and a smile that never touched his eyes, and he looked at my uncle's bar the way predators looked at wounded animals. "Riley." He nodded to the regulars, then focused on me. "Heard you were in town. Sorry about Ray. He was a good man." He was. I didn't move from behind the bar. Uncle Ray had taught me that the person behind the bar controlled the space, and I wasn't giving that up to Duke Salazar or anyone else. His eyes found the bottle immediately, and something flickered across his face before the smile smoothed it away. "Well, you found the old curse. Ray and I talked about that bottle more than once. He never could bring himself to pour it or throw it out. I'm noticing that pattern." I crossed my arms. "What did you want, Duke?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on the bar with the careful gentleness of someone handling explosives. I want to make this easy on you. You inherited a property with deferred maintenance, back taxes, and a reputation that scares off half the county. Ray was family, I respect that, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. I didn't touch the envelope. How much? 30,000 for the building and lot as is. I'll handle the bottle separately. Call it another 5 as a disposal fee. He tapped the envelope. Cash offer, closes in 2 weeks. You walk away clean, I expand my parking, everybody wins. 30,000 wouldn't cover my credit card debt, let alone give me a fresh start anywhere else. The lot alone was worth 3 times that, even in a dying railroad town. That's a terrible offer. Duke, it's a fair offer for a bar nobody wants, in a town nobody visits. With a curse, nobody's stupid enough to challenge. He said it pleasantly, like he was explaining weather patterns. But I'm flexible. Tell you what, I'll go 35 if you throw in the bottle today. I've got a guy who collects this kind of thing, locks them away where they can't cause trouble. Something cold settled in my chest, pushing back against the panic that had been my constant companion since I'd lost my job in Vegas. Since I'd gotten the call about Uncle Ray, since I'd realized I had nowhere else to go and nothing else to lose. I picked up the bottle, felt its weight, solid and patient. The bottle stays, I said. The bar stays. I appreciate you stopping by. Duke's smile thinned. Riley, be smart about this. You've got no experience running a bar, no capital for repairs, and no idea what you're stepping into. That bottle has a history. Then maybe I should learn it. I set the bottle back on the shelf, deliberately, where the evening light would catch it. Thanks for the offer, but I'm not selling. He studied me for a long moment, and I watched him recalculate whatever equation he'd been running. Finally, he picked up his envelope and tucked it back inside his jacket. Your uncle was stubborn too. Worked out real well for him. He nodded to the regulars. Danny, Maria, Hector. Always good to see friendly faces. After he left, nobody spoke for a full minute. Then Una Morales pushed through the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd been Uncle Ray's cook for 15 years, and she'd watched me grow up in summers spent at this bar, learning to pull beer taps and wipe tables and listen to stories I was too young to understand. That was stupid or brave, Una said, looking at me with the expression she reserved for produce that might have gone bad. I haven't decided which. Can it be both? I asked. She moved behind the bar, opened the register, and started counting the pathetic stack of bills inside. Your uncle refused Duke's offers 3 times. First time was polite. Third time, the health inspector showed up the next day, found violations that had been there for years. Ray fixed them, paid the fines, but it cost him. She closed the register carefully. Duke doesn't like the word no. Maria finished her beer and stood, reaching for her wallet. My grandmother used to say that bottle was insurance. Something about water rights and old claims, but she never explained it right. Just said nobody should pour it without understanding what it meant. Insurance against what? I asked. She shrugged, dropping bills on the bar. Bad luck, maybe. Or people like Duke. Either way, she said the bottle was waiting for someone who knew how to read it. She nodded at me. Good luck, Riley. You're going to need it. After they all left. After I'd locked the door and counted the register, after I'd wiped down the bar and stacked chairs the way Uncle Ray had taught me, I stood alone with the bottle. In the quiet, I could hear the building settling, the desert wind testing the windows, and underneath it all, something that might have been my uncle's voice, or might have been my own fear talking, clean bar, clear head. That's what he used to say. I pulled out my phone and opened a note file, titled it 30 Days to Solvent, and started writing. Item 1. Find out what FNS 1917 actually means. Item 2. Make the bottle an asset instead of a myth. Item 3. Prove Duke Salazar wrong about everything. The bottle sat on the back bar, patient as stone, its green glass holding secrets that had outlived everyone who'd been afraid of them. I wasn't afraid. I was broke, grieving, and probably in over my head. But I wasn't afraid, I was curious. The Dry Creek Municipal Library occupied half of a single-story building that also housed the DMV, and a water district office that seemed to open on a schedule, known only to God and one very determined clerk. June Delacroix ran the library on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings, and spent the rest of her time processing property records in the basement, where the fluorescent lights buzzed with the intensity of insects trying to escape. I found her there on a Tuesday, surrounded by bankers' boxes and the particular smell of old newsprint turning to dust. She looked up from a ledger that might have been older than the state itself, and her expression shifted from archival concentration to something closer to relief. "Please tell me you're here to rescue me from 1923 tax assessments," she said. "I'm here to ask you about bottles, distilleries, and what F&S means in 1917 context." I held up my phone, showing her a photo of the bottle I'd taken that morning. "Also, I'm hiring you for weekend bar shifts if you're interested. Pay is terrible, but tips are occasionally generous." June pushed her rolling chair over to where I stood, studying the photo with the same intensity she'd been giving the ledgers. "Finch and Sons. They had a distillery here, operated from about 1885 until Prohibition shut them down." She zoomed in on the tax stamp. "That's a bonded bottling, which means federal oversight, warehouse storage, specific proof requirements. This isn't just old whiskey, Riley. This is documented old whiskey. Everyone keeps telling me it's cursed. Everyone keeps telling me the library doesn't need funding. And yet here we are in a basement that floods every spring." She stood, moving to a particular shelf with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything lived. "Curses are just history nobody bothered to write down properly. Let's write it down." For the next 4 hours, we pulled records. Municipal ledgers showed the Finch property on Creek Road, 8 acres with water access. Tax rolls listed annual production through 1918, then nothing. A newspaper clipping from 1919, brittle and yellow, described a federal raid, a fire, and a family's ruin. But it was the battered notebook June found in a box marked "Salvage Fire," various, that made us both stop moving. The cover read "Finch and Sons, Rickhouse No. 2. Batch records 1915-1918 in careful copperplate handwriting. Inside, someone had logged every barrel by number, date, mash bill, and location. On the last page with entries, someone had written in hasty script, "Master bottle retains crest, visible by sunlight through bonded cut." If proof is needed for what? I asked. June turned back to the property records, running her finger down a deed transcription until she found what she was looking for. "Here, original Finch deed has a water rights clause tied to the distillery operation. If the distillery closes, rights revert to the county after 20 years. Unless," she looked up at me, "proof of continuous intent to operate can be demonstrated through authenticated bonded inventory." That's incredibly specific legal language. The 1890s were weird. She photographed the page with her phone. Water mattered out here, maybe more than the whiskey itself. The Finches weren't just making spirits, they were securing water access for the whole Creek Road corridor. She tapped the notebook entry. "If this bottle can prove lineage, and if it's been held in continuous care as bonded inventory, it might trigger the deed's preservation clause." I thought about the wax layers, the careful sealing, the way Uncle Ray had kept it behind the mirror instead of throwing it away. That's why nobody poured it. Not because of a curse, but because it was insurance. Insurance nobody remembered how to read. June closed the notebook carefully. "We need to talk to Benji Park. He was the cooper who maintained the Finch barrels before the fire, and he's got a memory like archival paper. Doesn't fade." I hired June on the spot for Friday and Saturday nights. $20 an hour plus tips and first pick of any interesting documents we unearthed. She handed me a library card and a photocopy of the notebook's last page, and I walked out of that fluorescent basement feeling like I'd traded superstition for something more dangerous, actual knowledge. Back at the Canary, Una was prepping for the dinner service we barely had, chopping vegetables with the precision of someone who'd learned to cook in places where waste meant hunger. She looked at me over the cutting board, reading my face the way she'd been reading faces for decades. "You look like you found something," she said. "Maybe." I set the photocopies on the bar, spreading them out like evidence. Uncle Ray knew, didn't he? About the water rights, the deed clause, all of it. Una's knife kept moving, steady and sure. Ray knew a lot of things. He also knew that knowing something and proving something are different animals. She scraped the vegetables into a bowl. He kept that bottle safe because he believed somebody would come along who needed it more than he did. Somebody who'd have the time and the reason to chase down proof. Somebody desperate enough to try. Somebody curious enough to care. She rinsed her hands, dried them on her apron, and fixed me with the look that meant she was about to say something I needed to hear. Duke's going to notice you poking around. He's got people everywhere, and this town's too small for secrets. Let him notice. I folded the photocopies carefully. I'm tired of being scared of my own inheritance. She smiled then, small and fierce. Your uncle would have liked hearing that. He'd also tell you to eat something before you chase ghosts, so sit down. I made pozole. I sat with my pozole, letting its warmth anchor me. For 20 minutes I wasn't a woman juggling deeds, bottles, or men with dishonest smiles. I was simply someone eating a good meal in her uncle's bar. But the photocopies waited beside me on the counter, patient as the bottle itself, a reminder of what came next. Benji Park's workshop sat at the far end of a dirt road most GPS maps pretended didn't exist. A cedar and steel building, it was surrounded by barrel staves in every stage of drying. Iron hoops hanging like metal halos, and the scent of fresh-cut wood sharp enough to stir something nameless in my chest. When I arrived, he was bent over his workbench, sanding a stave with the quiet focus of someone smoothing out floors invisible to anyone else. A saxophone murmured from the radio, slow and unhurried. He didn't look up as I parked. Only when the song ended did he set the sandpaper down, deliberate and respectful. Your Ray's niece, he said at last, no trace of uncertainty. You've got his walk, steady, never rushed. Riley North. I paused at the threshold, not stepping in without his leave. June Delacroix thought you might talk with me about Finch and Sons. Benji wiped his hands, his gaze sharp and steady. I'll talk plenty if you'll listen. He gestured me in. Show me what you've brought. I unwrapped the bottle as though it were fragile cargo. Benji stilled, the way a man does before careful work. He studied the glass seams, the uneven hand-blown curves, the layered wax. Only then did his fingers, toughened by decades of labor, lift it. He turned it under the light with reverence. Finch and Sons, he murmured. Bonded Nevada rye, spring of 1917. I remember Henry Merritt sealing this batch. I was 18, fresh back from the war, apprenticing with coopers older than Nevada itself. June mentioned a notebook, I said. Something about a master bottle and proof. They knew Prohibition was coming, Benji replied, tracing the tax stamp with a finger he didn't quite let touch. The Finches planned for it. This bonded seal, it's more than a stopper. It's a federal record. Mishandle it and you lose the proof. Proof of what? Continuity. That the distillery never truly shut down. He retrieved an old ledger filled with technical notes and barrel records. Their water rights depended on an operating distillery. When the raids came in 1919, all they had left was foresight and bottles like this, registered and sealed. I thought of the deed, of Ray keeping the bottle hidden, but safe. That's why people fear it. Not superstition, value. And value makes fools of people. Benji gave a small nod. Exactly. Most see just an old bottle. Duke Salazar sees a threat. But you, what do you see? My uncle's trust, I said quietly. And a cooper who's carried the craft in his hands for 70 years. He smiled, the smallest shift of his mouth. You've got ears. Let me show you something. Patiently he demonstrated the delicate art of removing a bonded cork, warming wax without melting, slicing the collar, preserving the federal stamp. Twist, never pull. The cork will resist, then give, like a secret revealing itself. We spent an hour in his workshop, his voice slow and steady as he taught me to read barrel marks, government seals, even faint scuffs beneath the glass. The liquid might be vinegar, he cautioned as I wrapped it up again. But the craft, knowing how to handle it properly, that's real. That's worth keeping. When I asked if he'd verify authenticity, he agreed. Your uncle used to visit just to talk. He never brought the bottle. Just wanted to know it could be done right. I told him craft outlives fear. He seemed at peace with that. Driving back with the bottle beside me, I thought about legacies kept alive in wood and glass, about fear giving way to skill. By the time the desert sky bled into nameless colors, I no longer saw the bottle as a burden. It was a promise. So when June proposed Curiosity Night, $5 cover, bar food, cheap beer, and the bottle lit on the back bar, I agreed. By Friday, the Canary was full, everyone watching that sealed rye like a snake behind glass, wary, fascinated, unable to look away. About bonded whiskey and Prohibition-era distilling. Una stayed in the kitchen, but I could see her satisfaction every time the order bell rang. The quiet man took a stool at the far end around 9:30. He ordered water, which should have been my first clue that something was different about him. He had dark hair going grey at the temples, steady hands, and eyes that moved from the crowd to the bottle with the kind of focus that made my spine straighten. After 20 minutes of watching him watch the bottle, I moved down the bar to where he sat. "Can I get you something besides water?" "Information, maybe." His voice was soft, the kind of soft that made you lean in to hear it properly. "That bottle behind you, where did you get it?" Every instinct Uncle Ray had taught me activated at once. It came with the bar. "Why do you ask?" He reached into his jacket slowly, pulled out a phone, and showed me a photograph. The image was old, scanned from paper, showing a man in an apron, standing in front of wooden ricks, stacked with barrels. Behind him, barely visible on a high shelf, was a row of green glass bottles. "That's my great-grandfather Josiah Finch," he said. "This photo was taken in 1918, 6 months before the raid." He zoomed in on the bottles. "You can see the wax seals, the way they're positioned. I've been looking for the last of these bottles for 15 years. The noise of the bar seemed to recede, leaving just his voice and my heartbeat and the weight of what he was saying. "You're telling me that bottle belongs to you. I'm telling you it belonged to my family and was stolen during a raid that destroyed everything we'd built." He set his phone down carefully. "My name is Elijah Finch. People call me Lige, and I'm not here to take anything from you without cause. But that bottle has a maker's mark under the punt that matches our family's stamp pattern." I thought about Benji's examination, the scuff marks he'd pointed out, the careful documentation. "What does the mark look like?" "Small cross with uneven arms, like someone started to make an X and changed their mind." Lige met my eyes. "If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and leave. But if I'm right, we need to talk about what happens next." Before I could respond, Duke Salazar appeared at the bar with a health inspector I recognized from his previous visits. The inspector looked uncomfortable, Duke looked pleased, and the timing was so precise it couldn't have been coincidence. "Evening, Riley," Duke said pleasantly. "Just wanted to introduce you to Inspector Morris. He's conducting routine checks tonight, making sure everyone's up to code." He smiled at the crowd. "Nothing to worry about, folks. Just civic responsibility in action." June caught my eye from down the bar, her expression communicating what we both knew. This was harassment dressed as procedure. But Sheriff Priya Rao was already standing up from her table near the door, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who carried actual authority. "Duke," Rao said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Inspector Morris. Funny timing for a routine check, given that the Canary passed full inspection 3 weeks ago." She positioned herself between Duke and the bar. "Unless there's a specific complaint you'd like to file in writing?" Morris shifted his clipboard uncomfortably. "Just following up on some concerns about occupancy limits during special events." "I count 42 people," Rao said without turning around. "Posted limit is 65. Anything else?" The standoff lasted 5 seconds before Duke's smile returned. "Just being neighborly, Sheriff. Making sure Riley knows the rules." He nodded to Lige. "Don't think we've met." "Duke Salazar, I own the Salazar station up the road. Lige Finch." He didn't offer his hand. "Just passing through." Duke's expression flickered. "Recognition or calculation or both?" "Finch, that's an old Dry Creek name." "You have family here?" "Used to." Lydia's voice stayed soft, but something in it made Duke's smile thin. Long time ago, after Duke and Morris left, after the crowd's attention returned to their conversations and June's efficient bartending, I gestured Ligier to the storage room in back. He brought his water glass and followed me past the kitchen where Una was plating orders, her eyes tracking our movement with the awareness of someone who missed nothing. I set the bottle on the cleaning table and handed Ligier a flashlight. "Show me the mark you're talking about." He tilted the bottle carefully, angling the light under the punt. There, barely visible in the glass, was the uneven cross, exactly as he'd described it. His hand trembled slightly as he set the bottle upright again. "I'm not here to take your inheritance," Ligier said quietly. "My great-grandfather lost everything in the raid. The distillery, the water rights, the family's reputation. This bottle is the only proof I have that we made something worth remembering." He looked at me directly. "But I also know you've got a struggling bar, a predatory neighbor, and a town full of people who think this thing is cursed. So maybe we can help each other instead of fighting over ghosts. What are you proposing?" "Partnership. Shared claim until we can prove authentication. If the bottle verifies, we use it to reactivate the water rights, rebuild what was lost." He paused. "I've got deeds, family records, photographs. You've got the bottle and the bar. Together we might have enough to make Duke Salazar very uncomfortable." I thought about Uncle Ray, keeping the bottle safe for decades, waiting for the right moment, the right person. I thought about Benji's careful teaching and June's research, and Una's steady presence in the kitchen. I thought about how every meaningful thing I'd ever built had required trusting people who knew more than I did. "We'll need a lawyer," I said, "and Sheriff Rao as witness, and terms in writing before we open anything." Ligier's smile was small and genuine, the first real expression I'd seen on his face. "That sounds exactly right." Sunday afternoon found 4 of us crowded in the Canary's back room. Me, June, Benji, and Ligier. The bottle sat on clean white paper under the examination lamp June had brought from the library's document restoration kit. Sheriff Rao was expected at 3 to observe and document whatever we found. The notebook entry mentioned sunlight through a bonded cut, June said, adjusting her glasses, which suggests the watermark is light-activated, probably set in the wax or impressed in the glass itself. Benji leaned close without touching. "The Finches would have used the federal bond seal as part of the security. You couldn't fake a watermark that only showed under specific conditions. Not in 1917. He glanced at Ligier. "Your great-grandfather was careful that way." "He was careful about everything," Ligier said. "Cost him everything when careful wasn't enough." I'd spent Saturday reading through the documents Ligier had brought. Family letters and deed copies and inventory lists written in the same copperplate handwriting Benji had recognized. The evidence was compelling but circumstantial. We needed the bottle itself to speak. "How do we test without compromising the seal?" I asked. Benji moved to the window, studying the angle of afternoon light. "We need indirect sun, not direct. Too much heat softens the wax wrong. June, help me angle the blinds." They worked together with the precision of people who understood preservation, creating a filtered beam that fell across the examination table. I lifted the bottle carefully, remembering Benji's teaching, and positioned it where the light could pass through the green glass. Nothing happened for 30 seconds. Then June leaned forward, tilting her head. "There, in the wax collar, see the shadow pattern?" I shifted the bottle slightly, and suddenly I could see it too. A faint impression in the wax, geometric and deliberate, like a ghost trying to surface. The shape suggested a crest, details too blurred to read clearly, but unmistakably intentional. "That's the Finch family mark," Ligier said, his voice tight. "My grandmother had the same pattern on her writing paper." I thought it was lost. Benji pulled out a jeweler's loupe, examining the impression without touching. "It's there, but we're not getting the full activation. The notebook said, through bonded cut, which means we'd need to slice the wax and let light pass directly to the glass surface underneath." "Can we do that without voiding the seal?" I asked. "Not legally." Sheriff Rao spoke from the doorway, making us all turn. She'd arrived early and silent, cop instincts in full effect. Anything that alters the federal seal requires witness documentation and chain of custody logs. Otherwise, it's just tampering. What if we document everything? June asked. Photographs, measurements, multiple witnesses? Rao pulled out her phone and a small notebook. Then you're getting close to legitimate. But here's the thing. If this bottle really does trigger water rights claims, you're going to need more than my witness. You'll need county records verification, possibly federal archives confirmation. She looked at me. And you'll need to do it before Duke Salazar figures out what you're trying to prove and buries you in injunctions. Duke already knows something's happening, I said. Friday night wasn't coincidence. No, it wasn't. Rao photographed the bottle from multiple angles, her movements efficient. Which means you've got maybe a week before he escalates. Less if he talks to the right lawyers. Lijay cleared his throat. What if we proposed a public verification? Controlled environment, official witnesses, complete transparency. Make it impossible for anyone to claim tampering or fraud, like a tasting. June's eyes lit up. We could frame it as historical preservation, invite the County Historical Society, make it educational. And impossible to stop without looking like you're hiding something, I finished. The idea was risky and bold, and exactly the kind of thing Uncle Ray would have appreciated. Una could cater. We'd need proper glassware, documentation packets, maybe even media coverage. Benji smiled slowly. You'd need someone to oversee the actual opening. Someone who knows bonded procedure and can testify to proper handling. You, I said. Me, he agreed. Rao finished her photographs and pocketed her phone. Get me a written proposal by Tuesday. Include safety protocols, witness lists, and proof of liability insurance. If I sign off, this becomes official county business, which means Duke can't interfere without going through me first. After she left, the four of us stood around the bottle, watching late afternoon light turn the glass into something between emerald and promise. We'd moved from protection to action, from myth to methodology. The bottle had survived a century waiting for this moment. Now it was up to us to prove it had been worth the wait. My great-grandfather used to say that good whiskey was just patience in liquid form, Lijay said quietly. Guess we're about to find out if he was right. Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of desert dawn that made edges sharp and promises feel permanent. I'd been at the Canary since 5, cleaning compulsively, trying to burn off the nervous energy that had kept me awake most of the night. When Lijay knocked at 6, I had the bar napkin ready, the one I'd been drafting terms on since Sunday. He brought coffee in paper cups and a folder thick with documents. We sat in the empty bar, morning light slanting through the windows, and negotiated like people who understood that fairness mattered more than advantage. Co-stewardship until authentication is confirmed, I said, writing in careful print. If the bottle proves Finch lineage, water rights flow to a joint venture between the Canary and Finch descendants. If authentication fails, I retain the bottle and bar without encumbrance, and you get documented closure about your family's history. Add a clause about shared costs, Lijay said. Permits, legal fees, whatever comes up. We split it proportionally to our investment, not equally. You're putting in the venue and your uncle's legacy. I'm putting in family archives and technical knowledge. I wrote it down, liking the precision of someone who'd thought about fairness from multiple angles. What percentage split are you proposing? 60-40 your favor. You've got the greater stake and the greater risk. He sipped his coffee. But I want a seat at the table for any decisions about the distillery's future, if we get that far. My family built something good once. I'd like to help build it again. Una arrived at 6:30, let herself in through the kitchen door, and appeared with a plate of breakfast burritos and the expression that meant she'd been listening. Add a community investment clause. If you two are reactivating water rights that were meant to serve Creek Road, then Creek Road gets a voice. A co-op structure. June appeared behind Una, earlier than her usual shift. Priority access for local investors, profit sharing for community infrastructure improvements. Lijay looked at me, and I saw the same understanding in his eyes that I felt settling in my chest. This was bigger than one bar or one family's loss. This was about rebuilding something that had been torn apart by forces beyond individual control. Add it, I said. We spent 2 hours getting the language right. June typing on her laptop while Benji arrived and contributed technical specifications for the handling procedure. By 9 o'clock, we had a 4-page agreement that balanced risk and reward, honored legacy and created pathways forward, protected individual interests while prioritizing collective good. Sheriff. Rao arrived at 9:30 with a notary seal and the kind of skeptical approval that meant she'd checked our work and found it surprisingly solid. This is either the smartest thing you've ever done or the most complicated way to open a bottle I've ever witnessed. She signed as official witness. Public event is approved for Friday at noon. Maximum occupancy 65, health and safety protocols mandatory. I'll be there with a photographer and a recorder. Everything goes on the record. What about Duke? I asked, what about him? Rao's smile was sharp. He's welcome to attend as a private citizen, same as anyone else. But if he interferes with official county business, he'll be interfering with me, and that's a conversation he won't enjoy. After Rao left, Lijay extended his hand across the bar. Partners. I shook it, feeling calluses that matched my own, the grip of someone who knew how to work. Partners. Una slid a burrito toward each of us. Now eat. You've got 3 days to prepare for the most complicated bar service in Nevada history, and you're both running on fumes and stubbornness. She wasn't wrong. But for the first time since I'd found the bottle, since I'd inherited a bar, I didn't know how to save. Since I'd lost my job and my direction and my certainty about what came next, I felt something that might have been hope, or might have been purpose, or might have been the simple satisfaction of doing complicated things right. Friday morning started with the air conditioning dying at 8 a.m. The repair company said they could squeeze me in next Tuesday. Maybe. The temperature inside the canary started climbing immediately, and with it, the certainty that this was not coincidence. Duke, June said flatly, standing under a ceiling fan that did nothing but move hot air in circles. He's on the HVAC company's board of directors. Of course he is. I was trying not to panic, trying to think through what heat meant for wax seals and preservation protocols. Benji, how bad is this? Benji stood near the bottle, which we'd moved to a cooler location in the back room. Wax softens at specific temperatures. Too fast and it melts unevenly, compromises the seal integrity. We need stable cool, not refrigeration cold. He touched the glass carefully. It's warming already. By 9:30, word had spread, and people were arriving early, packing the bar beyond comfortable capacity. The heat made everyone irritable, and I could feel the crowd's mood shifting from curious to skeptical. Duke's people were scattered throughout. I recognized 3 of his regular contractors, faces I'd seen at Salazar Station. At 10:15, the power flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. June appeared from the basement where she'd been checking the breaker box, her face grim. Someone loosened the main connection. I tightened it, but this isn't accidental, Riley. Sheriff Rao overheard and made a phone call that lasted 30 seconds, her voice too quiet to catch, but her expression clear. When she hung up, she addressed the room in a voice that carried. The county electrical inspector will arrive in 20 minutes to verify all connections and document any interference. Anyone who leaves before he arrives will be noted in the official report. 2 of Duke's contractors immediately headed for the door. Rao photographed them as they left. Una appeared from the kitchen with a rolling cooler full of ice and a brilliant improvisation. Lemonade service to keep people comfortable and occupied. Free drinks if you're patient, she announced. Good things take time and we're not rushing this. By 11 we'd stabilized. June had rigged extension cords from the library next door. Benji had created a water bath system to keep the bottle's temperature consistent, and the crowd had settled into something closer to anticipation than hostility. Duke himself stood near the back, arms crossed, watching everything with the expression of someone whose plan had partially succeeded, but not completely. At 11:45, Benji moved the bottle to the center of the bar where we'd set up the examination area. 3 copita glasses waited in precise formation. Sheriff Rao positioned cameras at multiple angles. June distributed documentation packets to the official witnesses, the County Historical Society president. A federal spirits inspector, Rao, had somehow convinced to drive up from Carson City, and a professor from UNR's history department. Lijay stood beside me behind the bar, our partnership visible and documented. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. My great-grandfather spent 30 years building something worth keeping. Let's see if it survived. At exactly noon, Sheriff Rao read the terms of authentication aloud, her voice clear and official. Every word was being recorded. Every step would be documented. Duke couldn't stop what he couldn't legally challenge, and we'd made everything so transparent that darkness had nowhere to hide. Riley North, Rao said. Whenever you're ready. I picked up the small knife Benji had prepared, looked at Lijay's steady presence beside me, at June's careful attention, at Una's quiet pride from the kitchen doorway, at Benji's decades of knowledge guiding my hands, at a room full of people who'd come to witness something rare, craft respected, history honored, patience rewarded. The bottle waited, heavy with more than whiskey, weighted with water rights and family legacies, and the question of what we chose to preserve when everything else was being dismantled. I began to warm the wax, exactly as Benji had taught me, exactly as right demanded. The wax began to soften under gentle, indirect heat, exactly as Benji had taught me. I could feel the room holding its breath, 60 people watching my hands move with the kind of attention usually reserved for surgery or prayer. The knife edge found the seam between wax layers, and I sliced cleanly, preserving the tax stamp's integrity with each careful cut. Steady pressure, Benji murmured beside me. Let the blade do the work. The wax collar separated in one piece, revealing the cork beneath, dark and dense, and marked with impressions I'd never seen clearly before. Federal warehouse stamps, batch numbers, and beneath it all, pressed into the cork's top surface, the geometric pattern Lijay had described. I set the wax aside on clean paper, positioned exactly where the cameras could document its intact seal. Sheriff Rao photographed each stage, her movements precise. The federal spirits inspector leaned forward, professional interest clear on his face. June was taking notes with the focus of someone building an archive for future researchers. Even Duke had gone still near the back of the room, his expression unreadable. The tax stamp needs to be preserved flat against the glass, I said, more for the recording than for myself. My fingers remembered what Benji had taught, muscle memory built from practice with training bottles in his workshop. I moistened the brittle paper carefully, pressed it smooth, waited for it to stabilize. Then came the moment everything had been building toward. I positioned my hand around the cork, thumb and forefinger, finding the right grip, the one that would twist rather than pull. The room's temperature, the angle of noonlight through the window, the weight of a century's patience, all of it converged in the space between intention and action. On 3, Benji said quietly. 1, 2, 3, I twisted. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, resistance holding firm. Then the cork gave that quarter turn Benji had promised, and something released. A sound like a whisper, like breath held too long, finally exhaled. The seal broke clean and true, and the smell that rose from the bottle's mouth was cedar and thyme and something darker, richer, that made the federal inspector nod with involuntary respect. Lijay's hand was shaking when he handed me the first copita glass. I poured a measure no thicker than a pencil line, amber liquid catching light as it fell. Then the second glass, then the third. The formation was deliberate. A triangle of glasses positioned where the noon sun would pass through them at the perfect angle. June moved the mirror we'd positioned earlier, bouncing sunlight so it traveled through the first glass, refracted through the liquid, and emerged as something more than simple light. The watermark appeared like a photograph developing in reverse, rising through the whiskey's surface tension, spreading across the meniscus in lines so fine they seemed drawn by someone who understood that proof sometimes required magic indistinguishable from craft. The Finch family crest materialized fully, a bird rising from crossed grain sheaves, the year 1885 beneath it, and around the border, text so small I had to lean close to read it, bonded in good faith, sealed for proof, held in trust for rightful claim. The room erupted, not chaos, but release, the sound of people who'd witnessed something rare and real. Applause mixed with exclamations, cameras flashed, and I watched Lige's face transform as decades of searching resolved into this single moment of validation. Tears tracked down his cheeks unchecked, and he didn't bother wiping them away. Sheriff Rao was already documenting everything, photographing the watermark from multiple angles, logging timestamps, witness signatures flowing onto official forms. The federal inspector tasted a drop from one glass, made notes in his own log, and pronounced it authentic bonded rye, remarkably well-preserved, consistent with 1917 production standards. The watermark's activation proves chain of custody and intentional preservation, the inspector said for the recording. This bottle was sealed under Federal Bottled-in Bond Act supervision and maintained according to preservation protocols. I'm prepared to certify its authenticity for any legal proceedings. Benji lifted one of the glasses, studying the watermark with satisfaction that went deeper than professional pride. Your great-grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, Lige. This wasn't just whiskey. This was a time capsule designed to survive everything except indifference. He believed someone would care enough to learn how to read it, Lige said, his voice rough. He looked at me. Thank you for being that person. I started to respond, but Una appeared with a quiet urgency that made me turn. Duke's on his phone, she said softly. And he doesn't look happy. Let him make his calls, Rao said, loud enough for the room to hear. This is documented federal and county business now. Any interference goes through official channels, which means paperwork and time and transparency. She smiled thinly. All the things that make certain kinds of people very uncomfortable. The crowd gradually transitioned from witnesses to celebrants, Una's lemonade flowing freely, conversations building around the implications of what we'd just proven. But I kept my focus on the immediate task, securing the documentation, protecting the bottle, and preparing for the next phase, because proving authenticity was only the beginning. Now we had to claim what it unlocked. June had the county recorder's office address programmed into her GPS before we'd finished photographing the watermark. Rao had called ahead, alerting them that time-sensitive documentation was incoming. We had until 5 o'clock to file the authenticated proof and trigger the deed's water rights clause. It was 1:15. I'll drive, Lige said, already moving toward the door. You and June handle the documentation. I'll get us there fast, but legal. The 30-minute drive to the county seat felt both endless and instantaneous. June organizing photographs and forms in the passenger seat, while I sat in back, reviewing Benji's affidavit and the federal inspector's certification. Everything had to be perfect. One missing signature, one unclear photograph, and we'd give Duke's lawyers the opening they needed. We arrived at 4, which should have been plenty of time, but Duke's attorney was already in the clerk's office, arguing something about chain of custody and unauthorized access to bonded federal goods. The attorney was young, expensive-looking, and armed with an emergency motion to delay any filing pending judicial review. This is harassment, June said flatly, setting our documentation on the counter. Every step was witnessed by a county sheriff and a federal inspector. You can't argue chain of custody when the chain is documented. Minute by minute, I can argue that opening a federally sealed bottle without DEA presence constitutes, the attorney began. The Bottled-in Bond Act of 1897 specifies procedures for historical authentication, the federal inspector said, appearing in the doorway behind us. I hadn't realized he'd followed. Those procedures were followed exactly. I was present as the federal representative required by law. Your motion has no standing. The county clerk, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd seen every variety of legal theater, held up both hands. Gentlemen, ladies, let's make this simple. Miss North, do you have complete documentation for filing? I spread everything across the counter, photographs, time-stamped and signed, witness statements notarized, federal certification, historical deed references, Benji's expert affidavit, Sheriff Rao's official report. June had organized it into a folder with tabs and an index. It looked like what it was. Homework done thoroughly by people who understood the assignment. The clerk examined each document with the care of someone who took her job seriously. 5 minutes became 10. Duke's attorney made increasingly desperate arguments about procedural irregularities, but the clerk's expression never changed. Finally, she looked up. Everything appears to be in order. The authentication triggers the water rights preservation clause in the original Finch distillery deed, which was never formally dissolved, merely dormant pending proof of continuous bonded inventory. She stamped the first page with a thunk that sounded like a gavel. Reactivation is granted, effective immediately. Co-stewardship between Riley North, proprietor of the Canary establishment, and Elijah Finch, documented descendant of the original deed holders. I'm filing an immediate appeal, Duke's attorney said. You're welcome to file whatever you want, the clerk replied. But the reactivation is on record as of... She checked her computer, 4:37 p.m., and appeals don't reverse activations, they just argue about consequences. She handed me a stamped copy. Congratulations. You're now responsible for water rights management for 8 acres of Creek Road properties, including maintenance of any historical distillery structures or their designated successors. Outside, in the parking lot, the three of us stood in desert afternoon light that turned everything gold and possible. Lee was reading the stamped documentation like it might disappear if he looked away. June was already on her phone, presumably calling Rao and Benji. I just stood there, feeling the weight of what we'd done settle into something real. We actually did it, I said. You did it, Lee corrected. You kept the bottle safe, learned how to open it right, brought everyone together. He paused. My great-grandfather would have liked you. Yeah, well... Your great-grandfather had the sense to seal proof in a way that could survive a century of people not understanding it. I looked at the stamped papers, at the official county seal that made everything irrevocable. Now we have to figure out how to build something worthy of what he preserved. June hung up and turned to us, grinning. Benji says the old Rickhouse Foundation is still viable. Una says she's already planning a menu. Rube says Duke left the bar about 30 seconds after we did, and he looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Good, I said, and meant it. Evening at the Canary felt different, like the building itself had exhaled tension it had been holding for decades. We'd returned to a bar full of people who'd stayed after the pour, waiting for news, and when we walked in with stamped documents, the cheer that rose made the old walls shake. Una had transformed the modest celebration into something closer to a town hall meeting. Tables pushed together, food appearing in quantities that suggested she'd been planning this for days. Benji arrived with rolled blueprints that turned out to be original distillery plans he'd saved from the fire 70 years ago. June projected photographs of the watermark on the wall. Huge and undeniable. I stood behind the bar. The place Uncle Ray had taught me belonged to whoever took responsibility for it, and looked at faces I'd known for weeks or years, or just hours. Lee J stood beside me, partnership made visible. When I spoke, my voice was steady. We've got water rights and historical documentation, I said. What we don't have yet is capital, equipment, or certainty that we can pull this off. So here's what I'm proposing. I gestured to June, who pulled up the document we'd drafted in the car. A community co-op. Membership shares at $500 each, priority for local investors. Profit sharing that funds municipal infrastructure first, individual returns second. It's the Finch family model, Lee J added. Build something that serves the place, not just the owners. My great-grandfather believed that water rights carried obligations, not just privileges. We're starting small, I continued. Micro distillery, maybe 200 gallons first-year production. Una's expanding the kitchen to include distillery tours and tastings. June's creating a historical archive and education program. Benji's consulting on barrel construction and aging. And the canary. Someone called from the back.